Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which is all about the DSPT and the new multi-factor authentication rules. We're just going to pause for a few seconds to let everybody else join the webinar today. See the attendees are joining at the moment, but just to let you know a few bits for today, a bit of housekeeping. We will be asking the odd question to the audience as we go through, so we'll be popping up a poll onto your screen every so often, and we will very much value your feedback on those questions. Thank you. So just a little bit about the agenda today. Graham and myself will be talking about the new multi-factor authentication policy, compliance around that, and the DSPT and all the sort of challenges that go with that. Just give people a few more seconds to join before we start. Okay, well, welcome to today's webinar, which, as I say, is all about the new multi-factor authentication rules for NHS Trusts and the DSPT. I'm James McDowell. I'm a technology writer with Assyrian, and I'm a former NHS healthcare journalist as well. This is my colleague Graham.
Good afternoon. My name is Graham Hawkey. I'm a PAM specialist at Assyrian. I've been working at Assyrian for over 6 years and been in the privileged access management space for approaching 10.
Thanks, Graham. So before we start our webinar today, just a little bit more information for you about Assyrian. If you didn't know us before, Assyrian is a cybersecurity software provider, and we specialise in privileged access management, otherwise known as PAM. Graham, just to start off with, can you tell us a little bit more about Assyrian and the types of organisations that we work with, please?
Thank you, James. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so Assyrian, we're focusing on the NHS today because we're talking about the DSP requirements that are coming. So on your screen, you'll see there's a number of organisations that reside within the NHS. These are our customers. We work with over 50 NHS organisations that trust us, and they use us for predominantly privileged access management in the first instance. We have other products as well which they use, but traditionally we support NHS customers from protecting backup systems against things like ransomware attacks, right through to full third-party and internal PAM access. A number of reasons why we're chosen by organisations, especially in the NHS, is we're rapid to deploy, easy to use, easy to administer, and we provide our solution out of the box, which is scalable.
I think it's also worth mentioning that earlier this year, Assyrian won 14 awards from the Independent Software Reviews website, including a gold medal, which made us a flagship leader in the PAM market. So I mentioned before briefly that we'd be asking a couple of questions throughout the webinar. Just to start off, we're going to pop a poll up on your screen now. We'd be very interested to know whether your organisation already has a PAM, privileged access management solution in place, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on that. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond before we carry on with the rest of the key. Thanks very much for your responses. Now I can see that, yeah, 64% do have a PAM solution in place already, 24% don't, and 12% not sure. So thank you for that, and we'll move on. So let's dive straight into this. So the MFA multi-factor authentication policy deadline is looming. So the NHS has just published new rules recently requiring that all digital systems have MFA protection with specialist focus on accounts with privileged access. So NHS Digital has said that bodies have been told they must achieve full compliance by 30th of June 2024. But in fact, they have even less time than that to be ready, because the statement says that NHS bodies must provide evidence of their plans to adhere to the new requirements by the 29th of February 2024 at the latest. And these must be provided to the National Chief Information Security Officer. So all Category 1 organisations should provide this information through an interim DSPT submission. Graham, I'm just going to ask you now a little bit about this. So how difficult do you think it's going to be for NHS Trusts to comply by these deadlines that have been announced?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it depends all on whereabouts they are on that particular journey. I mean, MFA, as we looked at the guidance, multi-factor authentication needs to be provided across remote access accounts. So all accounts that have remote access, also across all privileged accounts that have external access, and actually across all privileged accounts really as a whole. So, you know, it depends on where they are to where that fits. A lot of organisations, a lot of our customers, obviously, within the NHS have got protection across their privileged accounts with multi-factor because it's something that's built into Assyrian. So it's included in our solution. So, you know, customers can come and speak to us about how we can help them on that journey, securing access for those privileged users with multi-factor authentication.
So, I mean, how much work would you say, Graham, that is going to be involved for those organisations that are only using MFA in a limited way so far?
It depends on how they tackle it. I mean, the NHS is a very large organisation, obviously, dispersed all around the country with lots of different outreach organisations as well. So it's difficult if you think about having multi-factor authentication across those systems. Just doing a tally, for instance, you know, you've got well over 200 trusts, there's just hospitals alone. You know, each one of those has got a number of hundreds of different devices within their environment. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of different devices that you're protecting against privileged and user accounts that are accessing those systems. Bringing MFA in front of that, obviously, as another level of authentication, considering that, you know, if we look at something like Verizon breach report, 48% of credentials are still stolen for ransomware attacks, which is really what this is about protecting against. And there's a strong methodology to get this done. But there's different ways to attack it. But I would strongly recommend looking at a privileged access management solution like Assyrian that has MFA built in, and then we can roll that out for a number of your users that have privileged access to the estate within the platform already. So it's nice and simple to do that for us.
Great, thank you, Graham. So we'd be very interested now to know from you in the audience, is your organisation on track for the upcoming MFA multi-factor authentication deadline? So we're just going to pop another poll up, and we'd be very interested to see what your thoughts are on that. Appreciate that it is a deadline which is looming, only kind of 3 months away now, but yeah, so results coming. Thank you for your responses. It's quite a mixed response, I can see. 45% not sure, 23% say they're not on track at the moment. So, but about a third are on track, which is great. And we'll talk more now about how we can help with that deadline. So, just taking a step back, how vulnerable is the NHS? Well, the cyber strategy that was published by the NHS earlier this year, as you can see from this quote here, the scale of the impact, both direct and indirect, from a cyber attack on the health and social care sector is potentially huge. We know, of course, with about 1.4 million people working in the NHS, that's a lot of endpoints, so workstations, laptops, etc., to protect. Clearly, it is a very serious issue, and Graham just touched upon it there about ransomware being one of the most serious threats to organisations. We have seen numerous examples in the UK and internationally of cyber attacks, and they've badly disrupted the running of services with significant consequences. The most famous example, of course, 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack. So we know that really devastated NHS systems at the time. Business operations were crippled, and according to NHS England, I think it was 80 out of 236 trusts were affected. So Graham, would you say that the healthcare sector is among the major targets for cyber attackers due to that kind of very sensitive nature of the data that they hold?
Yeah, 100% yes, and a number of other reasons really. And you've just mentioned over 1 million staff. It's got to be one of the biggest attack surfaces in the UK if you think about it as an organisation, because it is effectively an organisation. So yeah, the attack surface is huge. It's under-resourced and vulnerable to attack, as we've looked at before, and having under-resourced, understaffed. You know, since all of the things that have happened in the last number of years, you look in the news, waiting lists go up. There's a lot of pressure on the NHS to perform and also to protect itself securely against cyber security attacks, and that's becoming more and more prominent. So yeah, it's a massive attack vector, a massive attack surface. hundreds of thousands of devices dispersed all around the country that need to be protected, as well as over 1 million users. So yeah, and think about the information and the sensitivity of some of the stuff that they're keeping on record about people, patients' data, addresses, information. It's very, very sensitive information that, if it was leaked into the wild, could cause very serious implications.
Absolutely, no doubt about that at all. So we've touched upon this a little bit already, but we have said that there is a privileged access focus to this new policy. So let's talk about that a little bit more in detail. So the NHS Digital's announcement on the new policy informs that organisations should enforce multi-factor authentication on all privileged user access to all other systems. They must enforce MFA on, firstly, all remote user access to all systems. Secondly, all privileged user access to externally hosted systems. NHS Digital stated that this policy will ensure that MFA is used on digital systems throughout the healthcare sector, with particular requirements on accounts that are remotely accessible or have privileged access to systems. So the DSP toolkit and privileged access, we've seen in recent years that protecting privileged accounts has become more and more important and been a key feature of the DSP toolkit. It's going to take you through 6 key points that we've identified about privileged access in the DSPT. Incidentally, you will see hopefully in your panel that there is a free guide for you to download, which has got a lot of information in today. The 6 points I'm about to go through, if you want to refer back to that, there's a whole section in there which you'll be able to read at your leisure if you download that for free. So let's go through those 6 key points about privileged access. So number 1, IT leaders must ensure that logs, including privileged account use, are kept securely and only accessible to appropriate personnel. Second one, these should be stored in a read-only format, tamper-proof, and managed according to the organisation information lifecycle policy, with disposal as appropriate. And then it talks about what's described as unnecessary user accounts and says that these must be disabled or removed. Privileged user access must be removed when no longer required or appropriate. The DSP guidelines also talk about former employees, guests, and other unnecessary accounts, talking about needs to routinely and promptly remove or disable these from internal workstations, Active Directory domains, and other user directories. And lastly, IT staff must consider the extent to which third parties are being granted privileged access, and if it's being limited to a set time, to mitigate the danger of security breaches. And we'll come on to third party access shortly. But Graham, any thoughts on these points that you'd like to elaborate on, perhaps the life cycle policy, but anything else?
Yeah, great point, actually, Jane. All of these are very relevant. The DSP is a really good framework, actually, to give to allow you to deploy the tools and technology that you need to protect yourself, along with the processes as well. And that's partly to do with process there, is around the lifecycle management of your accounts, your users, your passwords, who has access to what, when, where, and how. So it's about, yeah, it's really about, Assyrian can really help you control lifecycle management of all of that, users and devices, and the accounts that are used to access the target systems within the environment. It's a really key point, actually, around the lifecycle. Because if you're deploying PAM, you're leaving stale stuff all over the environment and stale accounts, then you're leaving vulnerability and chances for things to be breached. And also to mention the mentioning of the multi-factor authentication being brought in, I think it should be across all accounts. You know, some remote users, if you think about what they're accessing, they are actually in some cases accessing something that requires privilege. If you think about it, if they're accessing sensitive data on a machine or a system in an environment that's very sensitive, they should be using a privileged account. Should also they be recorded for that session as well, you know? So that there's areas of that come into play with it. But yeah, it's not just IT staff that need their accounts secured. It's thinking about who has access to privilege, and also third parties and suppliers about what they have access to and what they shouldn't be able to see or do once they come into the infrastructure.
Absolutely, and that brings us very nicely on, actually, Graham, to the next section, which is the risks of third-party access. So, just firstly, Graham, could you just outline, from your point of view, what are the dangers of third-party access?
Well, there's loads of dangers with third-party access. It's a necessity for life nowadays. The NHS has outsourced lots of services and things over the years for various different reasons, a lot of financial and staff reasons, I suppose. But now you end up with a lot of third parties, suppliers and contractors who have access to infrastructure, which isn't their own predominantly. They might manage an application or a service for you, or upgrade patching, that type of stuff. But they're going to have to come into the environment to do things. Well, we've seen recently with supply chain attacks in the news, it's very common for ransomware attacks to take that particular vector now and try to come through the supply chain because it's easier to attack. So really, I mean, for me, putting multi-factor authentication in front of these accounts and allowing people to use an authenticator to authenticate in. So I've been doing some research. NHS Digital mentioned that 99% of breaches can be scuppered if you have multi-factor authentication in front of the credential. And don't forget, stolen credentials are the most common attack vector for ransomware attacks. So yeah, all of this ties in. MFA, third parties, ransomware, all of these things tie into the same conversation for me around compliance.
Yes, we're saying here that multi-factor authentication really can help solve the problem with third-party access, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's putting another layer of authentication in front of them coming into your network and separating them from your network completely. We'll go into some more detail around how Assyrian works in a moment or so. But yeah, I strongly believe that putting this multi-factor authentication in front of all accounts will mitigate a lot of risk. I have the same thing. Very often I have someone trying to breach my telecommunications account, my phone account. It happens all of the time. And I get notifications to MFA push, and then I get a phone call come through. And that phone call is always trying to get that code from me because they can't breach the MFA mechanism technology-wise very easily anymore. So they then step outside of that, pick the telephone up and start ringing human beings and trying to get that code. So that's what's going on, as well as all of the other stuff. But if you think about that as well, you know, that's a breaking out of the technology and trying to get something off a human being. And that's the concern that I have, and that's something I've been through myself as well.
I was talking recently to one of our customers who runs a very large food production plant, and they were talking about third-party access challenges they'd had. They previously were using a VPN system, but they said that had brought kind of various issues. Is that something you've come across before, Graham, with VPN?
Yeah, a lot of time. I mean, Assyrian can be used as a replacement for that, so we can bring privileged users into sensitive environments without need for VPN. VPNs are quite old-fashioned, I suppose, way of doing it. It basically punches a hole into the environment and allows access into the environment. So it's very difficult to limit what people can see or do. So if I'm accessing via VPN, I can access things that I probably shouldn't be able to. Whereas with privileged access management from Assyrian, we can segment access. So you can only see what you're allowed to access for your job function or your contractual purposes to the hospital, trust, or ICS organisation.
So that is one of the challenges that's very relevant here. And another one is the threat to backup systems. So the National Cyber Security Centre has said that the NHS must pay extra attention to protecting backup systems as part of serious concerns about the NHS being a target for attackers. We know that NHS Digital made some special budget available in 2021 to help trusts with this particular problem. Graham, can you tell us any more about that?
Yes, a really good point, actually. The threat to backup systems has been around, for a number of years. The NHS Digital cited some funding, which was then attributed to a trust level. It was a small amount of funding to start with, but what it was really all around was protecting the backup systems against ransomware attacks. And then again, now you're seeing this MFA come in, which again is another layer on top of this, not just backups for all systems though. The backup systems in particular were a threat because you think about what the backup is, it's the protection of your environment. You know, traditionally ransomware used to go after, back in the day with WannaCry, it would go after the endpoints, lock those down and ask for a ransom, you know. But now they've discovered that if they can take the backup system out and you can't recover from it, they're very likely to get the ransom from you for a payout. And this is all for financial gain, really. So having your backup system protected through a Syrian PAM and having multi-factor authentication built in for the users that are allowed access to that system, and also having a just-in-time approval workflow process, so you can only ensure certain people can get on that system at certain times of the day. Having a recording of that session as well for full audit trail purposes is the key to everything now, I think.
Yes, and the DSP toolkit has a fair bit about backups in there, and it says that suitable backups must be made for all important data needed to recover the essential service in the event of such an attack happening. It also says these must be tested, documented, and routinely reviewed. Also, in there it says the backups must be kept separate from your network, so offline or in a cloud service designed for this. And that is a point that the National Cyber Security Centre also says about offline backups, making sure they're kept in a separate, different location, ideally off-site. Graham, a little bit more here from you. How can a PAM solution help to protect these backups? I know you've touched upon it a little bit already.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about the flow to the backup system, you know, having access to that backup system, having a strong, long, complex password or keys connecting to that system. You said having it offline. So think about having a local accounts which are connecting to that backup system, maybe not connected to AD, so they're completely offline from the rest of the network and separated from the rest of the environment. Having it in a cloud service, having it backed up into the cloud, so you've got that availability for it. Very important points to address. And having PAM in front of all of that allows you to control access to the backup, for who you want to have access to the backup, when they're allowed access to the backup, and then having that recording of who's been doing what on the backup system is important as well. So it's a full audit trail, end to end, controlling lifecycle management of the users, making sure there's no stale accounts, as mentioned earlier. Only the accounts that can be used have access to that system, and only the people that are allowed to use those accounts have access to those accounts to the target system.
Absolutely. And we'd be very interested to know, we're going to put another poll up now, interested to know what your views are on the biggest challenges that you face at your own organisation, whether that be third-party access, backups, MFA deadlines, or general DSPT compliance or managing privileged access. So we'll give you a little bit of time just to respond to that poll before we carry on, and thank you in advance for your answers on that. And it's very much a mixed response so far, but DSPT compliance looks like a very big one for people. Nearly a third say that, quarter say managing privileged access, and nearly a third say third-party access as well. So and yeah, there's a lot of challenges that organisations are facing, undoubtedly. Thank you for your answers on that. So how is Assyrian helping the NHS? Well, we already mentioned this earlier on, but we do work with 50 more NHS organisations who trust Assyrian to manage their privileged access. Graham, perhaps you could just explain a little bit more about why so many NHS trusts have come to Assyrian and chosen us to do this particular function for them.
That's a really good point, actually. There's a number of reasons why. I think, you know, firstly, we really listened and understood the requirements of customers from the NHS, you know, things like third-party access, protecting the backup system, DSP requirements. So we understand in depth the requirements and the needs of customers in that area. So we were able to speak to them and understand those in the first instance. And then we were able to relay back, you know, the information and the type of solution we could put forward, which was very cost effective for them. We listened to the budgeting requirements. We put forward packages that suited their requirements over other vendors in our space. You know, that's why we were successfully commercially in that space. But traditionally, while we won customers over, we can deliver third-party access through the same PAM solution. So you can deploy PAM and you can have third-party access through the same platform. So you don't need to deploy two different solutions. Makes it nice and easy for you to bring those remote staff in. All of our kit is provided out of the box. Multi-factor authentication is built into our solutions. There's no additional charge for it. You can roll out multi-factor authentication across all your PAM users, unlimited user account, make it really easy to bring them on board and make sure they're much better protected on that authentication method. Our appliances are included, makes them easy to scale, makes customers easy to scale the solution out into other areas of the business. We're a UK-based organisation, we build all our technology here. It's all about having that type of approach, and we're very much a customer-led white glove service type technology when we speak to customers and engage with people as well. I think that's traditionally why we started winning, but once we started winning a lot of NHS, it became really much more about referencing them to each other so they can talk to each other. And that's what we've done, is make sure that they can communicate to customers that don't have PAM from Assyrian. Our customers can talk to other customers in communities that want to use PAM, and then it makes it much easier for them to make the decision to move to Assyrian and us to help support them with their cybersecurity requirements.
I think it's worth pointing out that we have got a couple of quite in-depth case studies on our website. So NHS Lanarkshire, which is one of the largest authorities in Scotland, looks after 700,000 people nearly, with a huge estate with 900 or more servers. So those are all available on our website to read. She'll give you a bit more insight into this question as well. I think it's very much worth having a look at our guide, where we do go into a lot of detail about DSP, how that sort of those different details can be kind of met with the help of Assyrian solutions. One of them being around session recording. That's something that actually Software Reviews, this independent reviews website that talks to customers, has mentioned as awarded us a gold medal badge for earlier this year. And we're just going to go into a bit more detail now. Graham's going to walk us through privileged access management and explain a bit more.
Thank you, James. I just wanted to mention that Software Reviews is something we're very proud of as an organisation. Please do check it out. You'll see that it's the feedback and the reviews we've got is from our customer base. So you'll see how customers feel about using the platform and how customers feel about Assyrian as an organisation supporting them. So yeah, have a look. Thank you. Please do check that out. So if we look at privileged access management from Assyrian, this particular diagram is very high level for this purpose. Any customers that have been through the experience with me would have been through this slide already, but for the purpose of anyone on today that is new to this, we're going to talk through a third-party access workflow particularly, because that's something that's prominent for many use cases that you might have. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a non-privileged user, and on the right-hand side, we have privilege, which is able to access those target systems, which you can see layered there on the right-hand side of the screen. So traditionally, what will happen is someone will sign in using a web client. So with web-based browser experience to the user, we can present that to the third party or in any type of user, remote, etc. We treat the same. They will input their credentials. It could be SAML, it could be local accounts I mentioned earlier, it could be Active Directory integration, which all three of those are extremely common, and we can work with a mix of those. Most NHS trusts have a mix of those accounts. Once we've done that for first level authentication, we then will have MFA, which is built into Assyrian. So it's our proprietary TOTP built-in technology, which allows you to authenticate all of the users into the platform, whether they're internal or external. One of the main benefits of using this is that you can choose, any user can choose their own authentication app. So different third parties, different individuals at that organisation might want to use different methods to authenticate. So Google, Microsoft, all of the authenticator apps you're used to will work perfectly with Assyrian. Once we've carried out that secondary level authentication, we will get access to the PAM appliance. The PAM appliance is a highly available pair of appliances. Most NHS customers will have one on-prem, one in Azure is very common for my customers. That PAM appliance gives access to the target systems on the user's behalf. So the user will hop across the virtual air gap here, depicted by the brick wall. They will hop onto the PAM appliance, and then they'll be presented with a view, a list of application service switches, firewalls, routers, or the like, what they're allowed to access for their job function. They will then access that by the target protocol, so RDP, SSH, or any of the application protocols we work with for tools or snap-ins or applications, or web-based, browser-based experiences for privilege, to things like firewalls or Office 365 platforms. Once that's happened, the credentials have been injected on the user's behalf and rotated, so none of the non-privileged users on the left-hand side or the privileged users on the right-hand side have any idea what those credentials are anymore. They're then rotated, and we will change those in line with policies depending on the organisation. They get access to the target system. The administrator can carry out their job function. Might be doing something with the backup system we mentioned earlier. We might put a just-in-time workflow approval in front of that as well. So when they hit the PAM appliance, they might have to request access to that core critical infrastructure system before having access to it. So we can do all of that as well. All of that is encompassed with an audit trail and a session recording, as James mentioned, so we're very proud of. And then that allows you to have a full visibility of everything going on in your environment, full lifecycle management of all your users, accounts, and devices. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that walkthrough, Graham, very helpful. So a couple of questions have come through to us. Somebody's asking, I don't know how much you can say about this on right now, but what kind of costs are we talking about for Assyrian for NHS Trusts who are interested in knowing more?
It's a great question. We have packages for NHS, funnily enough. We've sold to a lot of them, obviously, as we mentioned earlier. So, you know, we've got starting on device packages starting from 10 for just protecting that backup, as we mentioned, 25, 50, 100 systems or devices for access. So there's target systems, unlimited amount of users we operate in. Anything above 100 is custom pricing, depending on our price list that we have for public sector. If you're looking at any of those type of packages or you have more, please do get in contact and we can have a conversation around cost with you. It'd be nice to catch up with you on that. Thank you.
Yeah, as Graham says, very much if you'd like to continue the conversation with him to explore anything else that you've heard today, please drop him a line on those details here. We do have another question as well. Can you share any best practices or case studies that demonstrate the successful implementation of DSPT guidelines? Well, I did mention briefly earlier, but we have got at least a couple of very interesting case studies on our website, the MLCSU and NHS Lanarkshire, which will go into a lot of detail about DSPT. And yeah, as I mentioned on your handout section, you should be able to see there are a couple of guides for you to download, including the Ransomware and Cybercrime Protecting NHS DSPT guide, which would be very handy as a complement to this webinar, we hope for you. So just to mention as well, there'll be a copy of this recording available to you afterwards. You can watch it on demand, anything you've missed you want to catch up on. But just like to say thank you very much indeed for attending our webinar today. We hope you found it useful, and do get in touch with Graham if you'd like to explore any further on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.